Okay, cool. I'm back. Okay, cool. So let me start sharing my screen. Just let me know again if you can't hear me, obviously.
Okay, I can hear you clear on my side. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Everything's fine. And then I think let's get started.
Excellent. And I can see the screen sharing.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle.
I'm going to mute myself now.
Okay, that's perfect. Thanks. Okay, cool. So then let's get started. So this webinar, of course, is about canine enrichment. I don't know if you guys knew that before. So I'm mostly focused on the shelter, but of course, all of this is applicable to the house as well. So this is actually something you might want to share with potential adopters. If you guys would like a resource or something like that, if you don't already have one, you can let me know and we can look at doing something like that, because it's just going to improve, I think, the odds of the dogs, settling in nicely in their new homes, if I can put it like that. And of course, I'm Angelique. My business is Treat to Train, and there's my website. If you guys need to contact me, all my details are on there as well. So let's get right into it. So what is enrichment? It's basically making sure that the animals in our care are emotionally, physically, and behaviorally healthy, and that they're able to perform species-specific behaviors in a safe, healthy, and appropriate way. So it's just meeting all of their needs. And as I said, please stop me if you guys have questions at any time. So there are different categories of enrichment. Anybody, any questions? Nobody? Okay. So there are different categories of enrichment here. We're not going to be focusing on all of them. So a lot of people don't know that things like healthcare, hygiene, diet and nutrition, all of that is included in enrichment. I've just listed them here for you guys, but we're not going to be talking about all of them at the same time. And if you guys have any questions, once again, stop me before I go on to the next slide. So we have things like mental exercise, independence and calming activities, safety and security, social interactions, environmental enrichment. And I'll talk a bit about each point now quickly before we go on to physical exercise, sensory stimulation, foraging, instinctual behaviors, hygiene, and yes, I've already mentioned the rest. So health and vet care is not just making sure that the animals have, are taken care of, that they have veterinary care and things like that. It's also actually making sure that they are taught things like cooperative care, so that they can actually participate in their healthcare and their veterinary care. The whole fear-free veterinary movement is also super important, and I think that's something a lot of people miss out on. So dogs and cats, all animals can be taught things like start button behaviors, where they can actually tell us if they'd like us to continue or not, if they'd like to take a break. So they're actively participating in the care, in their own care. And then obviously things like hygiene, and that can be species specific. It's going to be different for an iguana versus a dog. Specific species have specific needs. And once again, we can incorporate things like the cooperative care to help with hygiene, like making sure the dogs are comfortable with grooming, making sure that they're fine with us trimming their nails, or using scratch boards and things like that. Diet and nutrition, once again, different species, different needs. And not only that, I think there are lots of individual differences as well that we need to consider within species as well. We need to make sure that they have balanced diets, give them as much choice as possible as well. And then things like physical activity, engage their body, get them moving, things like that. Sensory stimulation, that includes things like textures, different toy textures, different smells, different surfaces that they get to walk on. And that's of course very, very important for puppy socialization as well. Then safety. So there's a difference between safety and security. So safety is being safe in the environment. So not having the opportunity to be injured, And security is actually the feeling of I feel safe, if that makes sense. The feeling of being protected from any harm, things like that. So that's just the difference between safety and security. And we need to be able to feel both. As humans and dogs and a lot of other species, most other species need to feel safe and secure, both. Then we also have things like the instinctual behaviors. With the innate behaviors, the normal things, those can be things like digging, just behaviors that come naturally to dogs and other species as well, like the cats that you guys have, like midday naps, things like that. Those are actually instinctual. And we need to provide a variety to enhance their welfare. Then things like the foraging, where you get to hide stuff around the house, that's an instinctual behavior too. Then we have things like social interactions. Dogs and cats are both social species, so they need to interact with conspecifics, with dogs, with people, and we can help them along with this, of course, as well, like a lot of our behavior modification is aimed at. Then mental stimulation, this is one we all know of. We don't just want to tire a dog out physically, we also want to tire them out mentally. But we also don't want to make them cranky. So we need to use both their mind and their body. We need to enrich both of those, not just physical exercise. Because if you are just focusing on physical exercise, you're going to get a very fit dog that has still not had its needs met. So most of the time people think exercise is the answer, and then they end up having a really fit, naughty dog, which is the opposite of what you want, actually.
Angelique, sorry, may I ask you a question quickly?
Yes, go for it.
The mental stimulation and the physical stimulation. Do you recommend that gets done? So you go for a walk and you play and you exercise, and then you come back to the run and you do the mental stimulation? Or do you suggest that it gets done on like 2 separate days, or with quite a big time span in between the two?
Okay, so that's a very good question, and I'm happy you asked. So none of these categories are separate from each other. We can do 2 of them at the same time, right?
Okay.
Does that make sense? So you can
It does,
actually,
yeah.
yes, a walk is going to include more than just physical exercise. It's going to include social interaction. It's going to include mental exercise. It might include foraging if you decide to do that on a walk. It could include sensory stimulation.
So the other day I took Georgie for a walk and we went into the farmyard, which was something totally different. So we tried to combine, doing the whole sensory thing. And so there was emotional stimulation, there was physical stimulation, mental stimulation. I gave him a toy to play with outside his pen. So that's why I just wanted to find out if it's a good idea to combine the 2 or to separate the 2.
Yes, no, so that's really good. And that raises a second point for me. Is there isn't going to be a set rule for every individual. So we need to look at every individual, but we'll get to this later on in the presentation too. We need to look at the effect that it's having to find out if it is best practice.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Cool. So let me continue. So independence and calming. So calming can be things like chewing, sniffing, licking, stuff like that. That's calming to dogs. But once again, I'm saying it's calming, but it might not be calming for all dogs. We need to consider this on an individual basis as well. Then we can do stuff like stationing training, doing, making sure dogs are able to do stuff without the presence of humans and other dogs around, And then we have environment, and that's not just the physical environment. That's also things like routines, the interactions they have with things. Predictability, choice, control. So it's more than just actually the physical environment that they have around them, basically. And I think we covered all of these now. So I'm going to continue to the next slide then. Okay, so now we get onto the point that you've actually already raised, Michelle. So throughout the whole thing, we need to have a goal in mind. What are we doing with the enrichment? Why? Then we need a strategy. How are we going to do the enrichment? Then we need to observe, is it actually enriching to them? Is it beneficial? Is there something we could do better? Or is there something that we need to take away for that individual dog? So we do our assessment and then we kind of start again. Enrichment is also about outcomes and not intentions. So as I already mentioned, we need a goal and then we need a plan for that goal. So it's more than just giving them items to play with and then kind of leaving it there. We need to make sure that they're interacting with the items, that it is actually enriching to them. And that's why observation is so important. And then enrichment, why we started with this before any behavior modification, is because this is the foundational step. So it enhances any further work that we're going to do with the animals. Next slide. Key considerations. So we need to provide variety, of course. If we don't, then they start to habituate to the enrichment activities, which means it's not enriching anymore. We need to be aware of overstimulation, especially in a shelter environment when there's always a lot going on. We need to be aware of individual preferences, as I have mentioned, and we also need to be aware that those might change over time. Sometimes the change could point to a problem or ill health or something like that. But sometimes it's also just, the dog went from being a puppy to being an adolescent to being an adult, basically, and that's going to change preferences. We also need to keep it positive. Anything that we do, of course, positive reinforcement. We want this to release really, nice dopamine and things like that. And we choose it based on the animal's current emotional state. So for dogs that are very, very scared, going out on a walk without any training to get them comfortable or anything is not going to be enriching. That's going to be a very scary experience to them. So we need to keep that in mind when we choose different enrichment activities. We need to make sure it's good and enriching for that individual. And then, of course, we need to consider sanitation and safety. So we don't want to spread diseases, especially in a shelter. We need to make sure that everything we do kind of keeps that in the back of our mind as well. We also don't want to put the animals in any danger. For example, dogs that are going to fight, we're not going to put them in a play group together because that's not safe. Any toys we give, we also want to make sure it's safe. So if a dog ingests objects, that's something that we want to monitor then. We want to keep that in mind all the time. And this is where you guys come in because you guys know your dogs well. So here we go. Why are we doing enrichment? These are the potential benefits. So we get to reduce stress in our dogs. We get to reduce behavioral deterioration if the dogs come in, and of course in the long term dogs at the shelter as well. We get to reduce illness because of course stress can perpetuate that. A lot of times there's also been a reduction in the length of stay of animals at shelters if enrichment is included. It's quite weird, but they've actually shown that dogs that have toys in their kennels at shelters are more adoptable than dogs without, which I find very interesting. And we also get to improve the overall stay at the shelter, their quality of life, their welfare. And I think that's the main motivator that we have. And onto the next slide. Okay, so now we get to strategy. So we've spoken about the goals. The goals are basically kind of what we've mentioned. Strategy. So we need stuff that's simple and easy to do. We need to try to incorporate it into routines because they need enrichment every day, ideally. And where we can kind of kill two birds with one stone, we really want to do that. We need small steps for big wins. For example, this is something we're going to do with the dogs at the shelter, and that's scent work. Scent work incorporates so many different of those enrichment categories. So that's a small step for a big win. Yeah, and then we need to enrich their living environment. So this is something that they need daily. And I'll show you the references later, and I'll upload it onto the shelter drive as well. Then you guys can go through those documents from the veterinary behaviorists that work with shelters. You can go through those documents yourself and then let me know if you have any questions, but this is just a short summary of it so far. So dogs daily need comfortable resting places. They need items to chew on. They need at least one toy rotated daily. They need social interactions daily with humans or with other dogs, dependent, of course, on the individual dog. They need sensory enrichment, physical exercise that is appropriate, novel experiences, and we need to provide them with variety. So all of this I got from the Association of Animal Welfare Advancement. Everything that I'm kind of going to talk about now comes from there, from their best practices document. So the first category that I'm going to talk about a little bit more in detail is sensory enrichment. So for sensory enrichment, we need to consider that our dogs and animals in general have keener senses than we do as humans. So if we're smelling something, they've already smelt it a long time ago, if that makes sense. They hear stuff, they see stuff in a different way, they smell stuff in a different way. So we need to keep that in the back of our minds as we do sensory enrichment. Sometimes actually reducing the amount of sensory input that a dog gets is helpful. So that's kind of where the calming enrichment comes in. So putting up barriers so the dogs don't see triggers, things like that. And then we also need to consider harmful chemicals, because a lot of times we want to use things like essential oils. And of course, we know the dangers that could have, and how harmful it could be for our dogs and especially for cats. So this is just a really nice picture of a shelter, and they created a little bit of a sensory garden here for the dogs, just a space where the dogs can kind of go and chill. And then all of these plants are safe for dogs and have different smells. So like here you can see there's some mint, there's some lavender, there's some rosemary, things like that. And they actually allow the dogs to nibble on things if they want, to smell if they want. So it's just a different sensory experience. And a lot of shelters add things like tires, half dug tires into the ground, different obstacles, tree stumps, things like that. So that's something that a lot of shelters do that I mentioned here. Then I also talk about comfortable living space. So we ideally need to facilitate daytime rest for dogs. If you look at their kind of circadian rhythm, just like the lions and the wolves and things like that, they're active in the morning and then in the evening again. And midday, they kind of rest. So if we can get the shelter dogs to do that, and the dogs in our homes as well to do that, you can actually see huge differences in their stress levels and things like that. And that's something we also want to teach them if we see some dogs are struggling with that. So I want you guys to be observant with regards to that too. Of course, clean and dry, just normal logical things, comfortable living spaces. If they ingest beds, then raised platforms, things that they won't be able to ingest. And I've already spoken about their natural circadian rhythm. So I don't think it's a problem here, but in a lot of shelters overseas, they have lights on, and sometimes the people don't actually switch the lights off in the evenings. So that's something that some of those shelters would have to consider, is actually providing time where the dogs, where it's dark, where the dogs can sleep. Then social interactions. So dogs are social animals, as I've mentioned. Not all dogs are going to be comfortable with all humans. Not all dogs are going to be comfortable with all dogs. So this is very based on the individual. So ideally, the dogs need to interact with a person for a minimum of 15 minutes per day. And of course, we need to consider if that dog is really fearful, then likely we'll spend those 15 minutes simply just working on our behavior modification plans. But those 15 minutes can look like training, behavior modification, reading to the dogs. That's something that happens in a lot of shelters overseas. And if you guys are interested in that, I can give you some resources. So just let me know. Doing play groups with the dogs, walking the dogs in groups, things like that. So the sky is kind of the limit, and we'll get to your homework as well at the end of the presentation. Then here we have cognitive enrichment. So we want their brains engaged, as I mentioned before. So this is giving them opportunities to investigate. It gives them challenges that they can solve. appropriate levels though, because we don't want to break their confidence. We want to build their confidence and their problem solving abilities. So if we know that a dog isn't going to be able to solve a puzzle, to basically tear up a box to find something inside, then we might cut the box in half to make it easier for them, and then build up to actually having a closed box. So we have to go back to our observations, because we want all of this to have a positive effect. We can do this. Cognitive enrichment can include stuff like training, novelty, other species typical behaviors, like if you have kind of a digging pit, something like that in a communal area, you know, and on a dog walk or something, you guys hide a chew or something in the communal digging area, and then the dog can kind of forage, dig in the area, and then take the chew back to its kennel. That's kind of something that you can include, things like that. So I'm just giving you guys ideas, basically. Then feeding enrichment. So we want to present their meals in a variety of ways. As much as possible, where applicable, we kind of want to ditch the bowls. We want to ditch the food bowls and see how else can we present the food. Of course, we need to take into consideration things like resource guarding. If the dogs are housed together, we need to consider that as well. But it also doesn't have to be expensive store-bought items. It can be things like boxes or toilet paper rolls, egg carton boxes, shredded paper in a little kiddie's pool, stuff like that. Just a whole bunch of different ways in which we can kind of enrich their feeding experience and give them something extra to do. Then novel experiences. We can get passive or active novel experiences. These can be things like field trips, digging spots, quiet spaces. So that would be kind of your passive novel experiences. Things like sniffing, and we want at least novel experiences of at least 30 minutes 3 times a week. So you guys can include these in your walks to kind of save time. These can include things like novel food puzzles, novel walking areas. You know, if you walk clockwise, normally you can kind of walk anti-clockwise. That counts as a novel experience. Things like that. Then we have stuff like the physical exercise, where applicable outside of the enclosure. But not just outside, we're going to do stuff inside the enclosure as well, because physical exercise is important for the dogs. So ideally, we want a minimum of 15 minutes a day. This can be stuff like running, walking, playing fetch, doing stuff like agility or tricks or canine parkour. And if you guys are interested in any of this stuff, we can do that. We can do stuff like dog dancing. We can do agility, things like that. Dog parkour is really, really nice to do, because it kind of uses the environment that we have. We don't need extra equipment for that. We're going to do stuff like canine yoga and things like that to also help with this one. Okay, and now we get on to a very important part of our strategy, which is tracking and planning. So we want to plan, set goals, and ideally make a list of kind of the things we have at our disposal, and also new ideas list, things we want to aim towards. And the biggest constraints that are in a shelter is basically money and the time. Those are the biggest roadblocks that we're going to face. So we need to see how we can actually work around those issues. We also need the enrichment to be easily accessible and organized. So we don't want to be looking for the puzzle feeders or the actual planning books or anything like that. It needs to be organized. It needs to be in the same spot so that we can kind of work efficiently. Then also prepare ahead of time as much as possible. For example, if you are feeding frozen items to the dogs, then prepare it at the end of the day, the previous day, and have it there in the freezer ready to go the next morning, so that whoever comes can literally just grab it and go. We need to see where we can incorporate it in the daily routine. If the kennels are being cleaned, perhaps before they leave, they can kind of drop their food puzzles there or something like that. And then we want to keep track, because the only way if we know something's going to work is if we kind of have a written record of it, which is more reliable than kind of our memories. So we need to keep track of what we're giving when, has it worked, And there'll be examples of this, and I'll load a few examples on the drive as well for everybody. And then I've already spoken about monitoring and assessing all of this. So here you can just see an example of what a shelter did. And they kind of listed the important parts for them. And this isn't something that you have to do exactly like that. You can make it your own, but this is something that has worked really well for them. Here is another example from the ASPCA, where they have kind of separated the pods and stuff into different categories to keep track. And then they've added a key there too. Yeah. Here's literally just another really simple one where they kind of split this up. I think this was actually from a daycare, not a shelter, but this is also just another idea of how this can kind of be included. So for example, with kennel cleaning, feeder can be given like that. At lunchtime, this can be done, you know, things like that to try and incorporate it into daily routines. Where can we be efficient? Here are another two examples. Of course, it's making it your own. So these are just another two examples. You can do it in a book, you can do it on a board, you can do it on a computer. The important thing is just that it's there and that everybody has access as needed. Okay, so here we go to observation. So very important, was it enriching? Is the animal using it? Are they interacting with it? For example, most dogs are not going to play with toys by themselves. So those are things we want to note. How are they responding to the enrichment? Is it actually causing them frustration? Is it causing more stress? Or are we getting a nice, tired, happy dog after they've, for instance, eaten from their food puzzle? As I said, is it a healthy interaction when they're engaging with the enrichment? So of course, for a dog to chase cats is going to be enriching for them, but that's not really something that we want. So we also need to consider things like that. And how is their behavior affected? So we want to see kind of a change in behavior. We want to see happy, more relaxed dogs. Have we kind of gotten to those benefits that we wanted? Have our goals been reached? Are they well adjusted? And then at the end of this, we want to reassess, readdress, and do it again, basically. If something hasn't worked, we need to look at why. We need to look at what we can change, what we can do better. And this counts not only for the dogs, but also everybody in the shelter who's working with the dogs. Because you guys are the most important part of actually getting this out to the dogs. If something isn't working for you, then we also need to look at what can we do to kind of change that to make it better. Because we kind of want to mitigate the development and the expression of abnormal and problematic behaviors. And we want to contribute to their overall well-being. But it all needs to be sustainable. Yeah, let me go on. This is basically the end now. These are some of the main references I used, and I can upload them to the drive. And then I want to know if you guys have any questions. You're welcome to unmute yourself now or post them in the chat or the WhatsApp group. My phone is also here.
So Angelique, what I've done is I've bought everybody a hardcover book, and we're starting to make notes with our progress with the animals that we're working with. I think I really liked your idea of us having a board so that maybe at the end of every week, we can update the board and we can consolidate everybody's observations. I'm not sure, Christian, Carl, what your comments are on something like that, so that we can actually start consolidating all the information that we have, even though we've got our own dogs that we're working with, but that we can kind of see what's working and not working. I don't know if you guys have got any comments on that.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a good idea to me. I'd like that, and then we can just all work from that one singular board. I'm happy to go like that.
Yeah. I like the idea of the board, Angelique, where everything sort of gets put up and it's visual. We're not just, keeping the notes to ourselves. So thank you very much. I really like that idea.
And I was just so fascinated by the idea of not when you're presenting meals and having it in different ways all the time. My mind would have been, the initial thought would have been having that as a structured thing, but having that as a more interactive way of engaging with them every day is actually a fascinating thing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
We've actually started the treat buckets as well.
Yes.
So they're treat buckets coming up with a few diet kibbles along everybody's runs.
Yes.
And even our guys doing maintenance, as they walk past the run or they go in to do maintenance, I've noticed that some of our workers are even, you know, taking the kibbles and scattering them, and the dogs are running after and foraging. That. So we've put that into action as well. And yeah, a lot of our guys are helping us with that. Even when they just walk past the run, they scatter now too. So thank you for that idea as well.
Okay, awesome. And that's working well for you guys. Have you noticed any change so far? I know it's still early days.
Not really. Our dogs get quite a lot of interaction usually anyway. And when the kennel hands go in, they usually take a treat or two anyway. But I think what's nice is just having different workers from different areas, throwing in some treats. And I think the foraging as well, because then they get to run after the kibbles and that they're not just sitting waiting for them at the gate.
Yes. Okay, that's really good. Anybody else?
So what's our homework?
Sorry, Michelle?
What's our homework?
Okay, so I'm going to post that on the WhatsApp group. Your homework is to find the weirdest type of enrichment anybody has used. So it doesn't have to be weird. It just has to be kind of something that you haven't thought of before. Okay. So I'm going to start off by posting something different that I found. Something that I would also think is really cool to include with you guys, because you sometimes have the farm animals there. So you'll see what I mean now when I'm posting it as we speak, kind of on WhatsApp. So this is my one example. So people that do get more than one example, please post that. It's just going to benefit all of us. But yes, no pressure if you don't. But ideally, that's what I want you to do. But it mustn't just be something unusual. It must be something that you think could be applied. Okay. Yes. All right. There we go. I've just posted that on the group. So here you can see it's just a bunch of different smells, different textures, something that not a lot of people think of, right? And you can do that with the farm animals you have. For example, if you have geese there or chickens, you can include some of their feathers. Or
you're going to laugh. I actually brushed the pigs the other day, and I've kept some of the pig hair for the scent swapping.
Yes, yes, that's good, Michelle. Very nice. So that's exactly what I'm talking about, because there we're kind of killing two birds with one stone, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts, any questions?
That is all fascinating, but thank you.
Okay, cool. If nobody has any more questions or any thoughts for me, then we're done for this evening. I'm not going to keep you longer than we need to. Then you guys can go have a nice evening.
Thanks so much, Angelique. I really enjoyed that. And I think as a team, we can only benefit from everything that we're learning. And I think sharing ideas is something, because everybody always comes up with different and unique ideas. So I think as long as we keep the communication open and we're sharing our ideas and we're sharing what works and what doesn't work, and we don't just throw in the towel. So I think this is really, really good for us. And I think it's going to, make us stronger as a team. And the animals are only going to benefit from this. So I'm really looking forward to this journey and where we're going and what we're going to achieve at the end of it. Thank you so much for all your guidance.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So then, yes, upload your homework and then I'll see you guys on Monday.
Okay, thank you so much.
Fantastic.
What time are you arriving on Monday?
Hang on. Monday's a public holiday.
Yes. Yes.
Are you guys still going to be open on Monday?
We will be, but we'll probably be quite busy with adoptions on Monday because public holidays, the people are usually adopting. So there's not going to be too much time. That's the only thing.
Okay, that's okay. Let me talk to everybody and then we can see what's gonna happen. Okay.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much for tonight.
Okay, have a good evening. Okay.
You too.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.